welcome to the 10th Wisdom of the Elders here at NERFA. It started here, crazy idea I had, and it's taken off. It's gone to Folk Alliance International.
I remember that first one.
Well, we will talk about that, I'm sure. And it's been at Southeast Regional, now does it annually. They did it at SWERFA, and Rich, I think, was the moderator last year at SWERFA. So it is spreading out, and the idea is that we interview elders and groups so that they spark each other's memories about things. And the main thing is that Mr. John Lupton, our sweet guy over there, records it and puts it up on YouTube. So you can see, we're building an amazing archives. We have 10 years just from NERFA, plus a lot of the others are up on YouTube as well. So if you want to check them out, you can do that at your leisure. And you can tell other people, especially if they're trying to do research about people who were in the folk community over the years. Anyhow, I'm Sonny Ochs, I think you know that. And even though I don't have a name, they couldn't afford one, I guess.
Budget cuts.
You don't need anyone's name.
And the other person without a name at the other end is Ron Olesko, who is my co-host. And Ron has done wonderful things this year. He has created, if you haven't started listening yet, you better, folkmusicnotebook.com. I listen to it every single day. It's just an amazing 24/7 folk music radio internet station.
On your phone.
On your phone, yeah. Well, I could listen on the way home, couldn't I?
Yes, you could.
I downloaded the app. The moment you got the award, I downloaded the app.
Oh, okay. Took you long enough.
So he got an award on Friday night as the creator of the year, and he certainly did create something beautiful. All right, we're gonna do approximately 15-minute solo interviews, and then go into the group section. And Ron is gonna start us off.
Well, thank you. I think we're going to start with Mr. Rich Warren. First of all, I want to say thanks for letting me be part of this, because all these individuals are people I've come to know through NERFA and have taught me a lot, and I appreciate it. And I think I want to start at the beginning with you, Rich. We're all involved in radio for different reasons. Where did you get your love of radio? And I think it was at a very young age.
Yeah. Actually, when I was 6 years old, this is not public knowledge, I had about 12 or 15 of those little 78 RPM records. You know, they're coming back in, I guess.
That's the next step.
And I carried my parents' really heavy, big Underwood typewriter to the kitchen table and took my records and typed up a list of my records, and then told my parents they could have any song for a nickel.
That's your first pledge drive.
But actually, my love of radio came about when I was 9 years old. I had rheumatic fever, and I was confined to bed for 9 months. That treatment no longer is done, thank goodness, but and I survived without any long-term disability. But my parents gave me one of the very first Japanese transistor radios, this little Hitachi radio, and I'd stay up all night DXing all around the dial, listening for different radio stations, and also listening to the local DJs. And I wasn't into rock and roll, I was into the sound of the station more, of the DJs, and could I relate to them, and what were they doing with the music? There was a guy on WMAQ in Chicago named John DeRemus who had a program called Patterns in Music. And as the title said, he played songs that related to each other. They weren't deep or pithy, but they had some sort of commonality. And I thought, wow, that's really neat. And so after I recovered, I think it was one of the toy companies, Ideal or one of those, came out with a toy radio transmitter that actually did have a range of about 100 feet. And I ran out and bought one. And I lived in an apartment building where the windows of my apartment faced the windows of the building next to me, so there was a very short range, and there was a high school teacher who wanted to encourage my love of radio, so she would listen to me and keep time in her window to show that she was listening. And I discovered somehow during that period of time, I think I was just started discovering WFMT, but also I always passionately loved folk music. I don't know where my love of folk music came from. My parents didn't come from my parents. Although they did have an album of sea shanties I liked, my parents thought the 33 RPM record was a passing fad, and that 78s would be here forever. But I did something with that toy transmitter that the FCC wasn't really pleased with, is it came with this little rod antenna, and I ended up putting a 100-foot antenna on it from my window through the separate garage complex so that people could get my little radio station for about 500 or 1,000 feet around my bedroom. And I had regular programming and newscasts, and then one day, I even published a program guide. And I got one of my high school, by this time I was in high school, I got one of my high school teachers to mimeograph it, and I'd stick it in mailboxes within that range. And someone complained to the FCC that I was wrecking their TV reception, which wasn't true because this is on the AM band. There are no harmonics from the AM band on the TV band. But one day I'm there and there's a knock on the door, and there's this immaculately attired gentleman standing there, and he flips open his wallet, and there's his badge, Federal Communications Commission.
Wow.
He said, "We've had a report of your causing radio interference. May I come in?" I said, "Certainly." He said, "May I see your transmitter?" So I walk him back to my bedroom, which fortunately was fairly neat that day. And he looks around and says, "Well, the transmitter's legal." And then he looks out the window and sees that antenna going out into the distance. He said, "Son, that's illegal. And if you don't cease and desist, your mother could face a $10,000 fine and 3 years in prison." And I'm thinking, My mom and I occasionally had issues. And,
Raise it to a dime.
so I asked him if I could do carrier current by wrapping the 10-foot antenna coil around a power cord. And he said, yeah, that was legal. So I got everybody on our power transformer at least would still get my radio station. And I tried to get a station for our high school, but that never happened. All the other high schools had radio stations, but mine didn't. But I was permanently infatuated with radio. And I don't know if you want to ask another question or if I should go to the next stage of...
Well, first of all, I'm glad to find out you were a troublemaker from an early age.
Oh, yes, I'm always troublemaker.
But yes, I guess you went into college, and that's where you really started doing radio at a college station?
Yeah, that's when I got to the University of Illinois, and they had a unique station at the time. There's only one other in the country like it back in 1968. There was a commercial radio station, a 3,000 watt commercial radio station, run like a real radio station that happened to be run by students. And I walked in the door, and they couldn't get me out of there after that. And I said, "You don't have a folk music show on. You've got all these other shows. You don't have a folk music show." They said, "Yeah, well, I hope Noah Paul's not here." I said, "Enough of Peter, Paul, and Mary. That's enough." I said, "No, I won't do a Peter, Paul, and Mary show. I'll do a very diverse folk show." "Oh, okay, prove it. Make us a demo." Well, I had left my record collection at home in the Chicago area, but one of the other guys at the station and I had kind of bonded, and he said, "Well, let's take the train back up to Chicago and get your record collection, come back down here, and when the station's off the air at 2 in the morning, record your demo." So in one evening, we raced up to Chicago, got my record collection, came back down to the station, and recorded the demo, and the next week I was on the air. And all this time I had been listening to the Midnight Special on WFMT in Chicago, and the show was a blatant ripoff of the Midnight Special, same kind of format, and it actually became popular. And then I started doing folk concerts at local Unitarian coffee house and broadcasting them live, and it was a rather successful time. And after I stopped being a student, I simply got hired at another local radio station and managed to get the job as station manager and took my show with me. So, and then when that fell through a couple of years later, I had already known some of the people at WFMT. I knew the general manager at WFMT. That's another story. And I said, "Give me a job." He said, "What?" And I said, "Give me a job." And he said, "Oh, I'll think about it." Well, I kept nagging him for 6 weeks, and finally he gave me a job. And they haven't been able to get rid of me since. So I'm very tenacious.
Yes,
so
we've heard.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your parents didn't really have a love of folk music, and you were listening to Midnight Special. Was that your first introduction to folk music?
There were various folk shows on the radio in Chicago back in the 50s and 60s. I actually heard a few of those before I even discovered the Midnight Special. A lot of stations had folk shows back then. Even WGN, which is the big Clear Channel AM station, had a folk show at 7 o'clock in the evening. And I don't know exactly where this came from. I just really loved the music. And I mean, my parents loved classical and jazz, and somehow, and then when, oh, well, here's the great story. So I'm about 12 or 13. We have a new neighbor move in, and they had a son my age. We became friends. And the Midnight Special used to be broadcast live on Saturday night and then rebroadcast on Wednesday afternoon. It was a very quirky thing WFMT did. And my friend said he could never go out to play on Wednesday afternoon. And I said, why is that? Well, the Midnight Special's on, and I have to record it. And he put a microphone up to the radio speaker, and we had to sit there for 3 hours in hushed silence while he recorded the Midnight Special. Now, the first time I listened to the Midnight Special, I thought he needed to be committed to a mental institution because it was a very strange radio program. I mean, it wasn't just folk music. They played all kinds of weird comedy and show tunes and off-the-wall stuff. But it was like drugs. I mean, the second time I was addicted. And I became like him. I used to go babysitting with a tuner under one arm and a tape deck under the other on Saturday night so I could record the Midnight Special. And if the people who I was babysitting for had a good tuner, I'd give them a 10-cent an hour discount. Yeah, right. So that's sort of how the Midnight Special really was a very, and there were two different people who did it, and they were two very different personalities. One was kind of a very cool, more into the show tunes and comedy and traditional folk, and the other one was this very warm fellow who liked more contemporary singer-songwriters, and I sort of gravitated toward his style, and he's the one I eventually begged for the job because he also became the general manager of the company. And
who were these gentlemen?
Oh, well, Norm Pellegrini, who was the program director, was the kind of cooler of the two, who was more in the traditional and comedy and things like that, and Ray Nordstrand, who was my idol throughout my teen years, ultimately became the general manager of WFMT, and he did the more contemporary singer-songwriters kind of thing. And I admired both of them, but were very different. I mean, Norm was a perfectionist. Everything had to be perfect on Norm's show. And Ray was like, well, so if there's 10 seconds of silence, who cares? You know, it was like, he just wanted to get the music out there, and he loved the local community, hung out at all the folk clubs. I mean, he was such a beloved figure, sort of like Gene Shea. Anywhere he went in Chicago, people just adored him. And whereas Norm didn't really go out to the clubs, he was more going to the opera and things like that. So that's
The Midnight Special, I'm sure most of us know it, but some people may not realize the history of that. And this is now the longest running folk music show on radio. How did it begin?
Well, first of all, it never began at midnight. WFMT was started in 1951 by a couple who liked classical music. And they did it almost went out of business several times. And they did it on a shoestring, but our first announcer was a guy named Mike Nichols.
Oh.
The Mike Nichols. He was going to the University of Chicago, and he was involved with the Compass Players and the founding of Second City. And so in 1953, the owners of the station, this couple, said, we hear folk music's getting to be pretty popular. We go off the air Saturday nights at 10 o'clock. Mike, why don't you just leave the transmitter on and do folk music Saturday nights at 10 o'clock? So the original Midnight Special was a live program, and basically the people who ultimately formed the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago used to come up and jam together, and there were people like Big Bill Brunzi and Fleming Brown and some pretty notable people who'd come up to the station. Studs Terkel would be there hanging out because he ended up working for us as well. And then ultimately the show started evolving. Mike couldn't be there every week because he was going to New York. And I remember Ray Nordstrand told me once, he said, I told Mike Nichols not to go to New York. He'd never make it there. He should stay in Chicago. And so it became a record show, and then Ray Nordstrand got hired. Norman already was there, became the first program director. And Norm didn't want to do it every week, so he said to Ray that they should alternate. And they alternated until 1993 when Ray became ill and was unable to continue. And then in 1996, Norm had a disagreement with the station management, and they agreed to part company. And I got a phone call saying, well, you're the last guy standing. You want to do the Midnight Special by yourself? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And then Norm called me up half an hour later and said, not only that, he said, you probably heard I've left, but I want you to do the show with my blessing, which was coming from Norm. Was the greatest compliment in the world, because Norm did not give out compliments easily. So that's how it sort of evolved.
Well, I think we'll be back with you shortly, and it's time to move on.
Very good. By the way, just very quickly, I would like each of you to just very quickly, how many years have you been on the radio
Well,
total?
I would say 51.
Wanda?
41.
Professionally 50. College, before that a couple of years.
Ron?
Folk 39.
And I'm a newcomer. I've done about 32. Add up those number of shows, hours on the radio. Amazing, isn't it?
In dog years, we're dead.
Now it's my turn to interview Wanda Fischer, whom I met in the mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s, yeah.
When I moved up to the Albany area. She was already entrenched there, and I was new kid on the block, but I had done radio, and I was involved in the folk scene. And I think it was when we did the People's Music Network was the first collaboration that we did. We were both involved in the committee when they had the People's Music Network that winter in Albany. So we got to work together, and over the years we've gotten to know each other so well. And Wanda is one of the most giving people I know. Whenever you need a hand or you need some help with publicity, she's there for you. She never turns you down. She's just special. Wanda, let's start out by talking about your early years.
Okay. Well, my father, I was born into a family that was immersed in folk music. My mother was from the Boston area. My father was from the same town as the Carter family. My father went to school with Joe, June, and Jeanette Carter. And in fact, in high school, my father and Joe Carter almost blew up Hilton's High School. They were partners in crime for many things. And when the chemistry teacher said, "You must not mix these two chemicals together because you might cause an explosion," my father and Joe went, "Ooh, doggies." And they mixed those two chemicals together and they caused a small explosion, but it didn't blow up the high school, much to their chagrin. And my father and June remained friends until my father died at a young age. He was 61 when he passed away. And June and Johnny went to my father's funeral, and the people in Weymouth, Massachusetts were like, "Who's in that bus?" As it drove up the street, to come to the funeral in North Weymouth, Massachusetts. My father and June and Johnny used to go antiquing on Cape Cod whenever Johnny Cash came to play in Boston, any time in Boston or south of Boston. And I have pictures of Johnny and June driving my father's motorcycle with a sidecar when they came up. And they were very nice people. They would come to our family reunions. June wasn't married to Johnny at that time, but I was 14 years old before I knew they were famous. I mean, they would just come and sing music at the family reunions, and this lady would come with this thing that she played up here, and it had all these strings, and I found out later that her name was Maybelle. So we would just sing at our family reunions and sing all these old songs, and that was the kind of stuff I listened to when I was little. And the very first time I ever sang in public was at a family reunion, and I was standing on a picnic table, and I sang "Your Cheatin' Heart." And there's a line in Your Cheatin' Heart that says, "You'll walk the floor the way I do." And the only thing I knew of that would make people walk the floor at that time, you're 4 years old, was an earache. I had no idea what it meant, but we were singing Hank Williams songs, we were singing Tennessee Ernie Ford, we were singing Patti Page and Patsy Cline and all this other stuff, and that was normal in my house. My father had left southwestern Virginia when I was 6 months old to get a job in the Boston area where my mother was from, because there were no jobs in southwestern Virginia when he came back from the war. And my mother had to threaten to leave him because he and his friends were drinking moonshine all day long, and there were no jobs. I mean, she said, "Well, I'm taking the kid and I'm going to Massachusetts, back to Massachusetts where there are jobs, and I'll get a job." And he said, "Okay, I'll go with you." So that was how it started. And there was my mother and father when my mother first met him, used to go on dates to a place called the Hillbilly Ranch in Boston, which was located near where the old bus stop was located in Boston, and many of the old guys who had come up from Appalachia would go to the Hillbilly Ranch, and Don Stover and people like Jim Rooney and Bill Keith would go to the Hillbilly Ranch to play, because they would play for these guys who were displaced from Appalachia, and this was the kind of music that they wanted to hear. My father took me to my first coffee house in 1959. It was the Golden Vanity, and I remember being there. He took me to see a guy named, Merle Travis.
Oh my.
And I believe that was in 59 or 60, and there's a live record that Rounder put out of that concert many years later. And I was like, geez, I was there. But I don't remember anything about it. I was 10 or 11. And my father took me to the Grand Ole Opry one time. And I think I was like, 8 or 9. And the Grand Ole Opry was not like what it is today. And we stood in line for a really long time to get in. And of course, it's me and my father. And I have to go into the ladies' room. And I go into the ladies' room, and I see this rat in the ladies' room. And I have to go to the ladies' room, so I go in and I do what I have to do. And I come out and I say to my dad, Dad, there's this rat in there. He goes, but it's the Grand Ole Opry. And he says, and I said, but it's a rat. And he says, you gotta do what you gotta do to go to the Grand Ole Opry. And my friends in Boston would laugh at me all the time, because I was 16 years old before my grandmother had indoor plumbing. We had to use an outhouse, and they're like, yeah, you're making this up. No, I was not making it up. It was not fun to go visit Graham every year, but that's what we did. But the music that we were exposed to at the time was one of the things that got me into this. And I started listening to radio. Most of the stuff was the stuff on the radio. We listened to WWVA in Wheeling, West Virginia. Clear channel station. And the first folk show I ever heard on the radio was by a classical DJ named Robert J. Lertzema.
Yeah.
It was WCRB, Classical Radio Boston, which still exists, which is a sub-channel of WGBH now. And it was Folk City, USA, 10 o'clock on Friday night, and we were too young to go anywhere, so we listened to WCRB. He had, all these great people on all the time, and I listened to that all the time. I listened to Dick Summer. He was on WBZ. Yep. Listened to him all night long. Stayed up all night long, and I've tracked him down on Facebook. He's still alive.
I'm sorry, but he and Bruce Bradley used to do talk changeover. Bruce
Yes.
Bradley was on before him.
Yes.
And they would spend 10 minutes going back and forth. It was
Yes.
the most, and I listened to that in Philadelphia.
Yep, it was a clear channel. And so we were, listening to that. I got fascinated with radio. And then when I was and I was a musician, and I did a lot of singing and playing in the Boston area when I was in college. And then when my husband went to medical school in Worcester, Massachusetts, I met my husband at a coffee house in Boston. I auditioned. He was the talent manager. And I was the prospective talent. I got the gig. That was when I practiced. I don't practice anymore. I still sing, but I don't play much. So, this is how this whole thing happened. And I'll tell you real quick, because I know Sonny's looking at the clock. But he was going to medical school, and I was like, okay, how hard can this be? Well, he was never home. And we'd only been married a couple of years, and I was like, what am I supposed to do? So I was over on the left end of the dial. This is in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I found this folk show. Folk show, this is free. So I'm listening to that. They had it on Saturday and Sunday. I think I'm going to go to this radio station and I'm going to volunteer. I have an English degree. What can I do? oh, you can help us with the program guide. Okay, I'll do the program guide. This is when we had program guides that were in paper. So I go and I do the program guide every month, and for a couple of months, it was just a couple of months, the guy who did the Sunday folk show says, I'm moving to California. So they looked at me and they said, oh, you know folk music? Yeah, I know folk music. You're a folk musician. Yeah, I am a folk musician. You're our new Sunday folk show host. I've never talked on the radio before. Well, you're going to do it now, and we're going to show you how to do this. And I was like, yeah, sure. And they said, no, really, we're going to show you how to do this. But first you have to get a third-class license from the FCC, and you have to learn math. I don't do math. Well, what do you mean you don't do math? We just have to learn these 3 algorithms. I don't do algorithms. Well, you're going to learn these algorithms. So I had to go to the Customs House in Boston and take this math test, sort of a math test, but you had to learn the laws too, you know, so I did really well in the laws. You had to get an 85. I got an 86. So I passed my third-class license. Got that, worked there for 4 years, came out to Albany when my husband got his residency there, tried so hard to get a radio thing. 2 years go by, third year goes by, he's finishing his residency. We're going to move back to Massachusetts. I'm now volunteering at WAMC to do the program guide. And they call me up, we're just getting ready, my husband's interviewing for jobs in Massachusetts. And they call me up and they say, do you happen to have a tape of one of the shows that you did in Worcester? Yeah, I got a tape, reel to reel. Okay, can you bring it over? Why? Just curious. Okay, I bring it over. And they say, after they listen to it, how would you like to do a show for us on Saturday night following a Prairie Home Companion? That's a pretty good opening act, I think. Okay, I think I'll do that. And I'm thinking, you know, I have 2 little kids. I have a full-time job. I have a husband who's never home. But yeah, I'll do a radio show. Yeah, sure. Can I see your record library? Yeah, we have 32 records.
This has been interesting.
So that's how I got my start at the station I'm
I
at.
just want to ask you one quick, you realize I've only asked her one question.
I don't know how to talk.
These are radio people.
These are radio people. I asked her one question and she did her own interview. It was incredible. It was so easy. But I do have one thing I do want to bring up because a lot of people wouldn't know about this. Wanda is a baseball nut. And she loves the Boston Red Sox.
Yes.
And because of that, she did something very special. A 2-minute description of what you did.
Okay, well, when I retired from my day job, I had always wanted to be a sports writer when I was young, and those opportunities for women were 0 back in the 60s. So I decided that after I retired, I would write a baseball novel. And I did.
And it's great.
And,
It's really excellent.
So it's out there. It's called Empty Seats, and I decided to set it in 1972 because I did not want these guys to have cell phones. I wanted them to have to solve their problems on their own and not just text their parents or their friends. So that's why it's set when it's set, and it was a lot of fun to write, and it's just there. That's all I can say about it.
And I'm not even interested in baseball, but I love the book. It's written in such an interesting way. All right, I'll toss it back to you.
Do we have any underwriting credits?
There's no fund drive? We don't have to do a fund drive?
No commercials, no breaks, no promos, it's just, except for your book. Well, I'm so honored to be talking to John, who I've gotten to know through NERFA. John is he's a legend in radio for many areas, especially New York on WFUV. And I used to listen religiously to you, but the worst thing that ever happened to me
What's
is
the
that,
Jesuit station?
yeah, but they moved his show right opposite mine on Sundays afternoons. So I not only lose my audience, but I also can't get to listen except on the archives. But John, I'm sitting in your seat that you were in 10 years ago when Sonny put on the first Wisdom of the Elders. So I think the burning question is, how did the Weavers get their name?
The inaugural Wisdom of the Elders, or as Biff Kennedy calls it, Wisdom of the Elderly, or as Angie Page calls it, Olden in the Way, was David Amram, Theodore Bickel, and Oscar Brand. And I was honored that Sonny asked me to co-moderate it, and I said, well...
He was the first co-moderator, and now he's one of the elders.
Yeah.
He's moved up.
I've moved up in the world. And Amram was just on his autobiography, and he was 80 years old, but sharp as a tack even now. Theodore Bickel was larger than life president in the middle of the table. And Oscar Brand, who I knew fairly well, I said, well, I'll take care of Oscar. Well, Oscar was not having a good day. And I asked him a question that he'd been asked hundreds of times, which was, how did the Weavers get their name on your radio show? And he just went off into La La Land. And I tried to reel him back in, and he went off to the La La Land. And so everybody said, well, I'm so sorry that happened. I said, well, what can you do? It was good entertainment anyway.
Right.
So how did the Weavers get their name?
We still don't know how the Weavers got there.
Well, there is a story, but let's not waste it now.
So I guess, John, you mentioned you grew up in Philadelphia. How did you get involved in radio?
Well, it's funny, I don't have such colorful stories as Wanda and Rich, but as a kid, I had my father's dictaphone. Remember those things? They were little plastic, and he was a lawyer, and I asked him to bring it home, and I would record my own radio programs at 10 years old at home, using 45 records and the advertisements from magazines to be my commercials. And it was WKJP, Devon, Pennsylvania. And that was just fun, I never thought of that as a career. Then when I got to college, which was at Princeton University, they had also a commercial FM radio station run by students. So University of Illinois wasn't the only one. And I wandered in, to the radio station thinking I would become an English major, and I ended up being a radio major. I mean, de facto radio major. There wasn't a communications department or anything like that, but I was, like Rich, I was hooked by it, and was the program director of the student radio station, WPRB. And Princeton is equidistant between New York and Philadelphia, so we used to listen to WMMR in New York, in Philadelphia, and WNEW in New York with Scott Muni and Jonathan Schwartz. But Dave Herman did a show on WMMR called The Marconi Experiment. It was a live show on a program, on a station which otherwise was an automated adult contemporary station. But he was one of our heroes. He had a great voice, he had a great presentation. And so I called up the operations manager at WMMR in June of 1969. As a college junior, I said, what's going to happen when Herman goes on vacation? He was just known by one name. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, he's going on vacation next week. And the guy who was supposed to do it can't do it. Do you have a tape? I said yes, which was a lie. Of course, stayed up all night and made a demo tape, drove it down to Philadelphia, and they were desperate enough, they put a 20-year-old kid on the air for Dave Herman for a week. Now, I didn't have a voice like Dave Herman, but I did know the music, and I could put it together, and I could talk about it. So they said, oh, that's good. Well, he's going to do another vacation in the summer. Do you want to do it again? And I said, well, let me think about it, because they were still just the one program, and there was another station in Philadelphia at the time called WDAS-FM, which was a full-time progressive rock station. And I parlayed my week at WMMR into doing vacation relief over the summer for the entire staff, plus doing a Sunday night show. So I was working 7 days a week for $40 a week. And one of the DJs at the time was actually Ed Shockey, may he rest in peace. At the end of that, and Gene Shea, by the way, did his show following mine. So I introduced Gene Shea on the air, and many times he didn't show up. So I would have to improvise on my folk music stuff, and it wasn't that deep at that time. It was maybe Tom Paxton and Peter, Paul, and Mary, but he had the tape cartridges of Joni Mitchell I could use in desperation. So anyway, there are more, war stories of that, but I went to my parents, I said, I really like this, I think this is what I want to do. They who had invested, a small fortune in an Ivy League education, and to their credit, they said, well, follow your bliss. And so anyway, the September of 1969, WMMR had gotten full time, and so I was able to do a weekend show there while I was doing my senior year in college. But they didn't have any jobs after, at that time, to go full time. So I had gotten to know somebody who had a tip sheet, that did radio stuff, and I said, well, are there any jobs out there anywhere? I don't care. And he tipped me to a job in Chicago. And so I packed up my little Volkswagen Beetle and drove out to Chicago, where I knew 2 people. And the rest, as I say, is history. WXRT was the 3rd station I worked at in Chicago. And that's how I met Rich, who was working at WFMT at the time. And we were really very inspired by WFMT, which has always called itself Chicago's Fine Art Station. And we were trying to do a progressive rock format that had a lot of integrity. And in the beginning, we didn't run any commercials. We ran commercials, but we didn't run pre-recorded commercials, which was the signature sound of WFMT. So I had lunch with Ray Nordstrand, and I said, Ray, we're thinking of calling ourselves Chicago's Fine Rock Station. Is that okay with you? And he said, oh, sure, fine. So they still, to this day, WXRT, which is still a rock station, has gone under different management. They call themselves Chicago's Finest Rock. So, at the time, I'm doing my own monologue here. Is that okay? I'm on a roll. I didn't have a specific history in folk music per se, because these were stations that did all kinds of stuff. So you would play Judy Collins and Joan Baez, and you would play, Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, and there wasn't a big distinction about it. But Chicago was a hotbed of folk music, as Rich will tell you. So I got to be friends with Steve Goodman and John Prine and Bonnie Colac and people like that. And so I, really got into it that way. And then I lost my job at WXRT in '79, went to New York, and the rest of that is checkered history.
And XRT went downhill when he left.
Well, thank you.
Well, when you were in Chicago and then also in New York, you were doing more than just being a DJ. You were also a program director.
Yeah.
That sometimes can be a challenge, can it?
Well, sure, but that's what I loved. I thought I'd been a program director in college, and it's kind of like being an orchestra conductor. You have all these different elements, and you're trying, get disparate elements together. And in that era of the freeform radio, the challenge was to get DJs to have, integrity and discipline, and not just go all over the, the freeform people would do the Sandman for 15 minutes, that was kind of, what people would do. So, it was a challenge, and I liked it. And I went to New York to be a program director of a commercial jazz station called WRVR, which is still legendary in the market. But after a year, the ownership changed. That's the way it goes. And they hired some guys from Houston to run the chain, Viacom, and they knew country music. They didn't know jazz, and so even though we were in the jazz capital of the world, they decided to make it a country station, which didn't last. And then they became the Light FM, and it's been a cash cow ever since. So that's when my career, took a bunch of detours here and there, and I guess the operative thing after that was I landed at WNEW FM in 1985, which again was a progressive station, and they had a guy named Pete Fornatel, who had, yes, may he rest in peace. He'd done different things at NEW, but the program director asked me to become his producer. And so he had 2 programs at that point. He was doing Saturday Morning 60s and Mixed Bag, which had just started a couple of years before. and that's a whole other story. And Pete was kind of skeptical. Well, I don't need a producer. I'd met him, but you know, we got along great. You know, and so we would prepare the shows on in the middle of the week. And after a while, we were like an old married couple. You know, we could finish each other's sentences. And sometimes I was then working. Got into working on the AM side of WNEW, which is the home of the big broadcast, and the Milkman's Matinee, and what was the other one? Well, Make Believe Ballroom.
Make Believe Ballroom,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
started with Martin Block,
Yeah.
and then went to William B. Williams.
Who-
That's when I used to
who dubbed
listen.
Sinatra the chairman of the board. So
Yeah.
that was, talk about legendary. But as a result, sometimes I would be able to get offered an interview, and he'd no, well, I don't want to do it. Don't want to come in. John, do you want to do it? So, well, sure. So I ended up doing Bonnie Raitt and Tom Waits and Randy Newman, and people like that. I said, okay, that's good. So shall I just cut the chase for FUV, or do you want to ask me the question?
Yeah, I was going to get there. So mixed bag, it really was a mixed bag. And
Yeah.
I guess that did lead you into FUV, which at
Yes.
the time was doing City Folk.
Right.
Which is sort of I guess it's hard to label these things, but tell us about how you got to FUV and what they were doing.
Well, yeah. So Pete, actually, and most people don't know this, he was supposed to bring Mixed Bag to WFUV. He had started his career at WFUV as a student in the 60s.
Pete?
Yes,
Oh.
Campus Caravan was what it was called, and he was, you know, ahead of his time then. And of course, he had his long career at WNEW and later K-Rock, and I think he was out of work. And so FUV approached Pete to do a Sunday morning show, and he said yes. And literally, like a week before, WNEW brought the old format back, and they had classic rock with classic jocks. And Pete said, oh, I got to do this. I can't do it. So he, left them at the altar. They turned to Christine Lavin to host Sunday Breakfast with Christine, which she did for 3 months, and did it in her inimitable fashion. But her inimitable fashion was so time-consuming because she was so, talk about being a perfectionist. So after 3 months, she realized that she couldn't keep her own, career and do the show. So she bailed out, and so FUV knew about my work with Pete, and they said, well, would you be interested in doing this? So I said, oh, well, okay. So the rest, as they say, is history. It was so good to be able to come back and do my own show. I did some stuff at NEW and K-Rock, subbing for Pete, but it was always his vision, and I wanted to honor that. But I said, if you want me to do it, it won't be just as historical as Pete would do, because he's really good at that, or what Christine would do was all news kind of stuff. I will be somewhere in the middle. So if you like that, I'm going to do it. So obviously they liked it.
One thing I've noticed with you on FUV, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I know FUV you had a very formatted City Folk. The playlist was of specific artists, but you seem to be able to choose your own artist and go your own path. Did that ever cause any friction, or was that something?
No, that was the intention.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always the sense that FUV would have a weekday format, which would be dictated by the music department. And of course, the mix of music has changed dramatically over those years. And we don't know to go into that. But the weekends, they have kind of said, let the DJs do their thing. In fact, they sometimes have referred to it as the art of the DJ. And over the years, Pete Fornatel came back to do Mixed Bag on Saturday afternoons. Vince Scelsa came back, who was also legendary in New York. Rich Connedy did a program called The Big Broadcast, that's what I was thinking of, which was a superb mix of jazz and pop from the 30s, 20s and 30s and early 40s. So, that was part of what they wanted to do to kind of give some spice to the program, to the format.
It's about 15 minutes, so should we?
Okay, well, let's just, what do you, come on, Sonny, wake up. I know it's hard. All right, we have three such long-term people here. You've watched the history of folk radio. You've been part of the history of folk radio. How do you feel about the way it is today compared to when you started? Let's start with you, Rich. You've been quiet for a long time, which is unusual.
I would just like to say first that if I had to be marooned on a desert island, these are the people I would like to be marooned with.
Same back at you.
And
You could do one hell of a fun drive.
those palm trees would be dropping coconuts like crazy.
Will you treat us to dinner?
And actually, I'd say the joy of NERFA, when Diane first invited me to come to NERFA 17 years ago, was to meet these people, because we only knew vaguely of each other, and then the listserv was formed on the internet, but we didn't know each other. And coming together at this conference and getting to know each other and respect each other and, in fact, love each other was very special. And when I come to these conferences, getting to hang out with these people and a few of the other DJs, some in the room, and some of the others, are just really special. So, you know, it's a really special thing. But to answer Sonny's question, I fear that, and I hate to be gloomy about this, radio, as we know it, broadcast radio in general, is definitely going downhill. It doesn't matter whether it's folk or anything. As new technologies supplant radio, internet streaming and podcasts, and the car manufacturers are going to stop putting radios in cars in a few years, and you will buy your car with a cell package. It's going to have a cell system built in, and which means the car will always be connected to the internet. And so you'll simply say, hello Siri or Alexa or Google or whatever you desire, and say, play me Folk Music Notebook, or play me whatever, and no matter where that is in the world, on the internet, you'll be driving along listening to it. So when we all grew up in radio, in a big market like New York or Chicago, maybe you had 30 or 40 radio stations to compete with, and it was easy to get attention because there were newspapers that mattered, and you could use billboards and bus cards and become known within this just 40 competitors. And now you have 5 million or even more competitors because of the internet, and unless you're very good at social media, there's no way to really get your brand out there. So it's a whole different world of communicating with people. And I think what Ron is doing with Folk Music Notebook, for example, is closer to the future than broadcast radio. I hate to say that. And the other thing is, I mean, folk music to me, and I use a very broad term of folk music, singer-songwriters, traditional, all the things we've heard here at NERFA, is my life. But we come to NERFA and we forget, you have this wonderful community of 1,000 people here, all sharing music and ideas and everything, that folk music is really a very insignificant form of music in the whole population.
Yeah.
You know, they did a whole series on country music on PBS, and what amazed me is that the first 3 episodes were all about folk music, really, when you're talking about the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers, and what I would call folk, but they call country. But folk music now, you go up to anybody, and whether you say roots music or folk music or whatever, they kind of look at you and say, yeah, that's nice. It's just not a great popular art form. And so where it's going in the future, I don't know. I mean, the beauty of folk music is that as it has continued for 1,000 years, it will continue. And some of the songs that people here are writing will somehow enter tradition, and the traditional songs will survive, but it'll be a very small segment of the population. And I think classical music ultimately is going the same way. That at least folk music, one person can make the music. In classical music, when you require a symphony orchestra, you have a real problem of paying 103 musicians to do a single work of art. So that's my take on this, is that we're looking at a new horizon, a new frontier, and I don't know where it's going, and it's definitely changed. Let me just give one example, is when I started at WFMT in 1974, Ray Nordstrom would go on the air and say, Bonnie Kolak is appearing at the Earl of Old Town this week, you all go see her. And you could go stand outside the Earl on a Friday night, and the line would go around the block, and every single one of those people heard about Bonnie being at the Earl on the midnight special. I can go on the air, and I did recently, and say, Tom Paxton's going to be the Old Town School, he's 82, he's better than ever, you got to go see him, who knows how long he's going to be touring. And I was jumping up and down on the air, playing his music. In a 300-seat hall, he sold 255 seats, which is very unusual for Tom, because he used to sell out all the time. So I will admit that I don't reach as many people. Our program doesn't reach as many people as it once did. And when it does reach people, they have all these other options now they didn't have. They can go on YouTube and watch Tom Paxton if they feel like it and not have to go out in bad weather. So we're looking at a whole different scenario for entertainment than we ever did before. And times, they are changing.
Yeah, I think Rich is right on all those counts. One of the things that I like about today's folk DJ scene, if you want to call it that, whether people are doing it on the internet, podcasting, whatever, I really enjoy personally looking at the folk DJ list and seeing what other people are playing. And that did not exist when I started out, when we all started out. I love watching what people in Utah, California, or whatever are playing, because it really piques my interest to see what is piquing the interest of other DJs. And we didn't have that when I started out. The other thing that I like to see is that there are more women getting into folk music broadcasting. And I'll give you, very interesting, the first station that I was at, small station in Worcester, Massachusetts, I went back for my 40th reunion of the beginning of that station. And there were only 4 of us still doing radio from back then. And, you know, there were like 65 people who came to this reunion, and only 4 people are still doing radio. And that were there at the reunion. There are probably 6 others around the country that are still doing radio. And this was supposed to be this big, liberal, progressive community broadcasting station. And do you know that those guys there ignored me? They basically ignored me. They all went on the air on the radio station and talked about the good old days. And I'm standing in the studio, and they didn't let me talk on the air. So what's changed? What's changed for me is reading the playlists, and there are more women who are posting on the folk DJ list than ever before. So I like seeing that, but it's still a problem. It's still a problem in radio. There are still not enough women in radio. And I see things happening. I just bought a new car because I wasn't planning on buying a new car, but the people at Subaru told me it was the last car that was going to have a CD player in it. And that's how I preview CDs that everybody makes, you know? I mean, when I'm traveling around, that's how I listen to everybody's CDs and figure out what goes with what. So, and I'm not afraid of technology. I use social media, as Rich said, you know, I tweet, I use Instagram, I use Facebook, I use everything, and, you know, I'm not afraid of technology, I'm not afraid of social media. I listen to Folk Music Notebook, I listen to other things online, you know, but everything has changed so much. I mean, we started when we had, my father used to have one of those record players, you know, with the 78s that you had to crank up. And then we went into LPs, and the first CD I ever had was from Christine Lavin, in, you know, 1989. And now, you know, where are we going? And none of us in this room can predict that. There's not one person in this room that can predict that. We can speculate, but, you know, I have this big place in my heart for terrestrial radio, but there's a place in my heart, but how many, you know, and then there's all these consultants out there that want to tell us what to do. You know, oh, they come in from the West Coast and they tell us what to do. And I had a program director a few years ago that said the block of music on Saturday night, which I'm part of, is just all Americana music. She didn't even know what the definition of Americana was. We had my show, then a bluegrass show, and then an early jazz show, jazz from the 30s and 40s. And, you know, she just said, well, it's just all Americana. You know, you people just play Americana music. So, you know, I can't predict where it's going, and we'll just be in this same boat until we figure out what's happening. I don't know how we can affect the change either.
John, can you predict?
Hell no. But I identify what Sonny, what Wanda was talking about, whether Subaru. We went to a dealer 2 years ago, just maybe finding a recent used Hyundai, and so the salesman was saying, well, so what's important to you? Do you want a sunroof? I said, well, that would be nice, but not necessary. In-dash GPS, that'd be nice, but not necessary. What do you want? A CD player.
Yeah.
And I knew this is probably what I've got is the last CD player I'll be able to get. So the things are changing, and we do have to adapt. There's always discussions at NERFA about you want to get physical CDs versus files and stuff like that. That's a whole other ball of wax. Only other thing I was going to say was that the one thing that encourages me is community. And NERFA fosters a community. Festivals like Falcon Ridge foster the community. As long as the community is existing, I think the music will exist in some form or other.
Yeah.
I just want to add a couple of things. Amazingly, Toyota reintroduced CD players in the 2020 Camry.
Really?
I was shocked when I went online.
I always liked Camrys.
Yeah.
But I was actually at my local Honda dealership talking to the sales manager because I was buying my partner a new car, and I was eavesdropping on one of the salesmen at the next desk who had a young couple in their 20s, and he was qualifying them, like how they could do the marketing better. And so he said, so what radio station do you listen to? And they looked at him quizzically with blank faces. Radio? Oh, we only listen to Spotify.
Yeah.
And that just shook, I was just shaken up. And addressing one point Wanda made, I am so proud of WFMT. When I started there in 1974, we had no female announcers. Now half of our staff are female announcers, and I'm hoping that when I retire from the Midnight Special that a woman will take my place. So,
I'd like to follow up on something that Wanda touched upon. You mentioned when the listserv and following others' playlists. I think all of us when we first started, we didn't have that luxury.
That's right.
But I think we each come from different markets, different styles of radio. But the one question which I think no one can officially answer is, what is folk music?
Don't even go there.
But seriously, when you program your show, what do you consider folk music, and then why do you program it? Is it for your audience, or are you trying to impart what you feel is folk music?
It's taste. It really is taste, I think, and also when you get reactions from your listeners. I have a particular audience that listens to my show, including people who listen from all over the country. And I have this one guy who calls me from Ohio all the time and tells me that he really likes the things that I play, and if the stuff that I play has a lot of, and don't cringe at me out there, people, if the stuff that I play is heavy in drums and overproduced so that the people cannot hear the vocals, people want to hear the vocals. And they don't want something to be buried and the production to be so overwhelming that they can't hear your vocals. If you're a singer-songwriter, they want to hear the songs you're writing. They want to hear your lyrics. And I just tell people all the time, I'm an English major, I got to hear lyrics. And that is what I hear from listeners. That's what they appreciate. So that's what I usually select, and I try to put things together, the new music as well as the old music together, and it's got to be a mixture of, the Tom Paxton and early Judy Collins, as well as the new things and the mid-range things, so the things from the 80s and 90s and the newer things, and you put them all together in a logical fashion. Somebody told me yesterday that he had seen the latest documentary on WBCN from Boston. And I used to listen to WBCN as a rock station.
It was like the equivalent of XRT.
Yes, it was. And it was a wonderful station. That's how I learned to put segues together, from listening to WBCN. And now I can't wait to see that movie, that documentary. I actually contributed to that movie to be made because I have a great feeling for WBCN. And that's how I learned to do segues. And I think that when you put together music in that fashion, and I know these two guys do the same thing, you can't, I can't put a song back to back that doesn't go with the previous song. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work in my brain. And And that's just how things go for me. And that's what the listeners who listen to my station and the people who recently discovered it have come to appreciate, because that's what I hear from them.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rod, because I love the folk music notebook, but you don't do segues. You can't do segues, with an algorithm. But you have great taste, so fortunately, that's true. And I think we are hardwired, the three of us, to do sets. If I listen to a new record, a new CD, or a new file,
New file.
automatically my mind says, what will that go with?
That's what happens to me too.
And if I'm doing something in the car, which I do, and it drives my wife crazy, I have little post-it pads. This song goes with that song, so I don't forget it. And when the time comes to prepare my show, I've got pages of notes in a notebook. It's like many of you who are songwriters, you have notes or songs in a book somewhere, and you're going to turn them into a full song. I'll turn it into a show. So I think there's a sense of integrity within for me, I can speak of, and unfortunately I only have an hour now, so it's mainly 2 or 3 record sets as opposed to longer ones I used to do. But what's the balance of the overall balance for the show, and then internally, how do you make those sets hang together? And Rich, you do great thematic sets, and I try and do some of that too. Sometimes they'll steal from you. I think maybe you'll steal from me, but that's all part of the folk process.
That's called gleaning.
Yeah.
Gleaning, yes.
Well, I think I'm the only one here that I inherited a show created by giants. I mean, Norm Pellegrini and Ray Nordstrand were brilliant, brilliant men. And they created what I consider an incredible radio show. And it has a history. It goes all the way back to 1953. And the descriptor is folk music and farce, show tunes and satire, madness and escape. Now, they weren't as heavily into folk as I am, but I have a legacy to uphold. So if I don't play some of the old stuff from the 1950s, because we have listeners who are in their 80s who have listened since day one and said, you're not playing enough Murray and Miranda. And they haven't made a recording in 35 years, or Martha Schlama. And so I have to play some of these people from the 50s because these are our core listeners. And I also want to play the newest cutting-edge singer-songwriters. As far as what is folk music, I like the late Roz Larman had the best definition of folk music. Roz says, folk music is whatever Roz says it is. And Ricky Nelson had a song called Garden Party. He says you can't please everybody, so you might as well please yourself.
Please yourself.
And so when I'm listening to CDs, I try to figure out how my listeners will perceive them when they come out of the radio speaker, how much I'm enjoying it, how I can make it presentable to the listener. And some songs with drums I'll play because somehow the drums feel appropriate to the song and they don't cover up the vocal. Other songs just don't work for me with a lot of percussion because it just distracts. It's my personal opinion. I don't mind a bit of steel guitar or things like that, and yet I got a complaint, what's all that twangy guitar you've been playing lately? It all depends on the artist, the song, the quality of the performance. I mean, there's drumming and there's drumming.
Yeah.
There's bad drumming and there's Cheryl Prashker. I mean,
Exactly.
Shout out to Cheryl wherever you are.
I just refuse to make a definition. I play what's considered pop music. I play a lot of traditional ballads. I'll play an unaccompanied ballad, which is death for ratings. I mean, because somebody hears 5 minutes of somebody talking about something that happened 1,000 years ago and they kind of drift away, but I find that valid. That's folk music too, so that's where it started.
Well, and I think all three of us probably have a wider playlist than some other people who are folk DJs, and we pride ourselves on that, but I think that our audiences come to expect that. I think there is an implicit trust between the listener and the station, in terms of, well, okay, I'm going to get something from a host who's doing something that he believes in. So even if I don't like it, maybe the next one will be better. But he's not doing it because it's a playlist, he's doing it because he thinks it's something that you as a listener need to hear.
Well, and also instrumentals. Some people don't play instrumentals, and I do, because some of them just are very uplifting to me, and they sound so neat. And, every now and then I'll play an instrumental piece, and somebody will call up and say, what was that? That was so cool. And the other thing that I mentioned yesterday in the radio thing, I'm getting phone calls every now and then, and I said this yesterday, it goes something like this. My mom used to make me listen to your show, but now I like it. I listen to it myself, and I'm making my kids listen to it. So, maybe there's some hope for the next generation to expose them to this kind of music. The other thing I pick up from the folk DJ list is a song will pop up and I'll say, oh, I haven't played that for a long time. And then now there's new music that I can think of that will go with that one. And then I'll see something that John plays and I'll say, oh, John, I haven't played that for a long time. And then I'll say, oh yeah, here's a new piece that'll go with that. And then I start doing the same thing. And the same thing when I'm listening to new music in the car. And I'll be driving along, bopping along on the highway, boop, 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 boop. And then I'll go, I know it goes with this. Okay, all right, keep going. I have a notebook on my side, my passenger seat. Carrie Estrin was on my passenger seat on the way down here, so my notebook's in the back seat now.
She wasn't taking notes for you?
No, she wasn't. And that's how I got the names for some of my characters in my book, by the way, passing by streets, and I picked up names on the side of the highway. But, so this is how creative minds work. And we've got 5 people up here right now who are creative minds in radio, just like a singer-songwriter puts together a song. This is how we put together our radio shows.
Well, one of the problems now, though, is whereas before the internet, if you want to listen to Midnight Special, you heard it in sequence in the order I intended it from beginning to end. Well, 40% of my listeners now listen online to an archive, but thanks to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, they can't listen from the beginning. That's against the law. So we have to put the show in a 5-hour stream, and when they click into it, they're somewhere in the middle of the program, right? They might tune in right in the middle of a sequence that they're not going to get what I planned at all because they're hearing it in the middle. And I don't know when they're going to tune in because it's random. Whenever somebody clicks on that app or goes online, I have a very specific notion of how every show should work. I like to usually open the show with something very lively and upbeat and welcoming. I view that as when you open the front door and somebody's standing there, if they have a big smile on their face and they're friendly, you're more likely to invite them in. So I try to open the show with a very upbeat series of songs. I don't usually want to hit them on the head with something of great political import or depth. And then the show has sort of a sine wave kind of thing up and down, because I learned from Tom Paxton, among others, that if you want to impart a really serious message to somebody, you disarm them with comedy. And fortunately, since my show includes comedy, I will find something funny or outrageous and play a sequence based on that. I mean, maybe something by Agronoff or maybe something from Monty Python. And then I'll slam them with a really heavy song about death or politics that's really serious, because you've gotten their defenses down. At the same time, you've entertained them. Also, as far as instrumentals, I play instrumentals, but I look at them like when you're having a fancy meal at a French restaurant. They serve you that sorbet between courses to cleanse the palate. An instrumental, if you've given somebody a really heavy emotional thing, if you've played a song that just has somebody weeping or just really feeling, this, you don't want to follow it with more words. They've had all the words they can take for a few minutes. Yeah. So you find a great instrumental or 2 or 3 and let the person recover. Let them relax and just enjoy the music. And then you can come back with something different. So it's like a little break in the set. So there's always a little bit of thinking of what fits not just each song together, but in the whole pattern of the program to create a whole. And I just, sorry that the idiots in Washington, thanks to the record labels, who are the ones responsible for the digital millennium, I can't even talk straight.
Digital millennium
Thank you. I used to be in radio, but I,
The dreaded digital.
yeah. It's really wrecked it for us because, as I told our general manager, the irony of this is 90% of the people who were aired on the Midnight Special would sign releases saying we could air the show in sequence, they wouldn't object to it. But it's when we play the Leonard Cohens and the Bob Dylans and the Joni Mitchells who are signed to major labels, they are not going to permit it. So
yeah.
that's the,
We've all heard your creative process and how you put together a show, but and we all talked about station management, but ultimately I always felt that our boss is the audience. How do you respond to audiences? Getting phone calls? I know, Wanda, I think you're probably the only one here that, on the three of you that do a live show. The rest of you pre-recorded, but I'm sure you get emails and requests, complaints. It sounds like you're trying to program for what you feel is a vision, but how much does the audience suggestions or critiques influence you? Let's start with John.
I think you take everything into account, so that's important. Either after the fact response to something, or perhaps a suggestion for, I wish you would do that, and so, well, okay, well, how does that work in? Frankly, I don't get, hostile reactions. I think I'm lucky that, I don't have listeners pushing the hot button that way. I just think it's something I take into account.
Yeah, I get mostly positive things, and people will call and mostly ask questions about the music now. The most negative things I got were at the beginning, when the show was beginning, and sometimes I will get, if I play something really hyper political, somebody will call and say something about that, but usually I can talk them down from the ledge. I did public relations and marketing as a day job for 40 years, so I'm pretty good at that. They'll say things like, "I'm taking back my pledge of $22," things like that. Okay, fine. Everybody thinks that if they give a public radio station $5 a year, they can tell you exactly what to do. But I think that most of the time I can ask them, well, what bothered you about this, and what was it? The people just don't like the songs that they can't hear the lyrics on, and I think that that's a valid complaint. And I will say to them, you know what? I think you might be right on that, and then they stop because they're disarmed. They don't know what to say if you tell them that they have a valid complaint. They're like, what? You mean you kind of agree with me? Well, as I was listening to the song and it was going on, I think maybe you're right. Maybe I won't play that one again. And they really, oh, you mean my opinion is valid? Well, yeah, it is. And thank you very much for calling. And then I have certain regulars that call every week. And they call every week, and I recognize their voices, and I know exactly who they are, and I use their names. Oh, hi, Ed, how are you this week, Oh, I'm doing fine, everything's good. Could you play me a Gordon Lightfoot song? Well, maybe, I don't know, I didn't plan on playing one this week. How about next week? Oh, yeah, that'd be good. But there are a few people who are just basically nasty, and you just say, okay, fine, yeah, okay. One guy from Canada calls me all the time and tells me I don't know anything about the music, and I go, okay, fine. I think that, but I like talking to listeners. I prefer doing my show live. I don't like it when I pre-record. I really don't. I like having that feedback. I like getting emails. I like being able to respond back to them if they have complaints or if they have suggestions. That's just who I am, and I think it's because I did PR for 40 years, because that's just was my job.
Your turn, Rich.
Well, I'm trying to find an email here that I guess I can't find it. But I got an email from Aidan Quinn and Christine Stay, who are Friction Farm, saying they got a gig in North Carolina thanks to airplay on the Midnight Special, because they had performed for some fellow 10 years ago and he had forgotten about them, but he was listening online to the Midnight Special and reminded how good they were and called them up and booked them for a house concert. That's why I was playing with my phone, not looking at messages.
I thought you were looking at
No,
messages.
I never would do that. I have mixed feelings. I get some very angry email from listeners, just horrid, because I'm very political. And my left-wing politics, I don't hide them. I don't say anything. I never say anything with this mouth about politics, but I let the songs do the
Let
talking.
the music do the talking. Yeah.
And we had Cy Khan do a live concert a week ago, and I got this email. Who's that horrible left-wing guy howling at the moon. You know, why'd you put this 75-year-old, you know, left-wing guy on the, I just really, I think I did finally answer the guy. I said, well, he's a very respected singer-songwriter, and I thought it was, you know, he did a magnificent performance, and I'm sorry you didn't care for it. Sometimes I reply, sometimes I let our music director reply because she's very good at these things, and she likes my politics, so it's not a problem. She makes sure some of these never reach the higher station management.
You're a 75-year-old left-wing guy.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Working on it. So, well, you know, I'm just, sometimes listeners, I get the most incredible email, and it keeps me going. One guy, one woman emailed me saying, well, you know, I had been in a coma for 2 months, and my daughter used to bring a radio to my bedside and turn it on to the midnight special because she knew I loved that show. And what she didn't know is I could hear it. She said, I was comatose, but my hearing was still working. And every time I heard that show, I felt better, and it made me want to keep going. And then I recovered. And I want you to know how much that meant to me is that I had a Air Force helicopter pilot in Iraq who people were sending him tapes of the Midnight Special because it was his favorite radio show. And he used to email me from Iraq, you know, telling me what was happening. And then he came home and he said, I want you to know I resigned my commission. I was a captain and I resigned my commission, partly because of, you know, listening to your show. So yeah, it means a lot. And I want to do one brief anecdote, and then I'm probably going to have to leave because I have an airplane waiting for me at LaGuardia. And one never knows the traffic between here and there. This is my favorite story of why I love WFMT. Is 2003 I went to Folk Alliance, and John McCutcheon gave me his new CD, which had a song about John Ashcroft on it.
Yeah.
Hilarious song about Ashcroft, about the TIPS program. And I couldn't wait to get back. I played it the next week, and Monday morning, the general manager and the program director conference called me and says, what the hell did you play Saturday night? I said, there were no obscenities. Did you play something about Ashcroft? I said, yes. Can we hear it? I said, yeah, the CDs are still at the station for the show. Go listen. The next morning, they called back and said, at ease. And I said, what is this all about? Well, you just cost us a $50,000 a year sponsor. It turns out the woman who owned the Steinway dealership in Chicago was John Ashcroft's half-sister. And a friend of hers had heard it on the Midnight Special and called her and said, they're insulting your brother, you shouldn't advertise on this radio station. And she canceled her advertising. And they said to me, we're not happy, but we're not going to tell you what to play either.
Wow.
And so I think, you know, I just think I am so lucky that to this day, management has been so supportive of letting the Midnight Special do what it does. And, you know, what can I say? I work for a very special place, and I'm very honored to be a part of it. And as I said earlier, I'm also very honored to be a part of NERFA, to be here with you, sharing this. One of the fun parts about being in radio is sharing all this music all weekend and getting to then take your music home with me and share it with all these listeners. And that's what makes it exciting coming here, is knowing that I can take your music and go home and next Saturday night say, here's some of the great music I heard at NERFA. And that's what keeps me going, is all the vitality of the music that some of you who are musicians out here in the audience make. It's a joy.
Okay, before you run away, one of the things I like to do here at the end of the session is to say, we are talking about the wisdom of the elders. Would you please impart a short bit of wisdom, Mr. Warren?
I think I already gave all the wisdom I have to give. Is that, to me, and the reason I got into that little toy transmitter when I was young is a fusion of, I love music, but music is so much more fun when you share it with people. Singing in the shower is not where it's at. If I can take your music and share it, that's what makes me a whole person. And that's why I'm in radio.
All right, and before you leave, I want to be able, actually, Wanda, I want you to do this. This was your idea.
Okay, well, the folk DJs got together and we decided that we wanted to give this certificate of appreciation to Rich Warren in appreciation of your lifetime dedication and countless hours of energy for folk music advancement, especially for the NERFA Folk DJ Showcase, November.
all I can say is I'm incredibly moved because coming from my peers, people I love so much, this really means a lot to me.
Safe travels, my friend.
We got you a good ride to the airport.
Can you guys all stand up for a minute while he's still here so I can get a group shot?
Okay.
We're not done yet.
We're not done, we're not done yet, but we just need to,
We just need this group shot.
we need a group shot with the
Ryan,
Platt,
and also
with Ron and Sonny too. There you go.
One more. All right.
Okay.
All right, well, since we were on the topic of imparting wisdom, we'll go on with Wanda, words of wisdom.
Don't overproduce your songs.
Yay.
Let us hear the lyrics. Keep playing your music. We love it. And just keep in touch with us. We want to hear from you. We want to play your music. We don't want you to fade into the woodwork. We love hearing from you, and we want you to continue to be creative so that we can be creative. This is so important. This music that you are doing is so important. Your message to the world is critical, especially in these times. These times are like nothing I've ever seen in my 71 years on this earth. And what you have to say needs to be said. I don't want you to fade off into the woodwork. You've got to be there for us. You've got to be playing the coffee houses. You've got to be out there telling people what's going on. We'll tell people that you're going to be playing. And, you know, it means so much to me to be a conduit for what you're doing and to put it together in a creative fashion so that I can help you as much as I can. You all mean so much to me. And that's the best wisdom I can give you. And you know the old song about my life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentations. And the last line is, how can I keep from singing? That's you. Please continue.
You expect me to follow that? I think what you said about being a conduit, you know, is so important. And I'm going to get emotional too, but since, you know, I got to WFUV and had a chance to have, you know, my 3-hour show, now 1-hour show, you know, I can really feel what my life is for, you know, and it is to be a conduit. And all the things that Wanda just said about, you know, what the music, what your music does for us, and how we're able to, you know, again, use our programs as a platform for other people to hear it. And, you know, I've created this website, newfolk.org, which is another way of being able to, you know, get more folk resources out to people that I don't have time for on a 1-hour show, with blog posts and reviews and playlists and concert calendars and stuff like that. But you know, I talked about it last night on the stage. After the election, you know, the election, don't need to tell you which one.
The election.
Yeah. I realized more than ever I had not only perhaps an opportunity, but an obligation to put songs of compassion and commitment on my show. I needed to not just do it randomly, I needed to make a special effort to include some of those in every show. It's not a, you know, a set that has a headline or something like that. I don't even necessarily going to draw particular attention to it, but they're there. And those songs, some of them, you know, came from Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan, but a lot of them came from you. because you had, the desire to write songs to respond to this moment in time. And, they're not necessarily even available on a record. You'll say, well, I've got this new song, would you like to hear it? Of course, God bless Christine Lavin when she subs through the show. She really is a sponge for those things. But the world needs to hear those songs, and they need to hear them in a timely fashion. So it's not a question of just, getting them out there in 6 months. Sometimes they need to be heard right now. So, thank you for that and for your continued creativity and your own integrity for what you do. WFUV created a bumper sticker or a decal that says, "Music makes the world a better place." Well, and somebody said that, and we all went, yes. And I believe that more than ever now. So, thank you.
All righty. This has been quite a powerful panel. I'm really impressed. And of course, I want to thank Rich Warren, who had to run and catch an airplane, Wanda Fischer, and John Platt, and my co-host, Ron Olesko. These guys made it so easy for us.
How about some wisdom from those two elders?
Well, no, I was going to say we need to do Wisdom of the Elders with Ron and Sonny and somebody else, and we'll be happy to moderate.
to ask the
because
question.
you've got
We don't know how to talk or anything.
Yeah, I see that. Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoyed. And remember, John Lupton has been videotaping this. It will be up on YouTube, and you just type in Wisdom of the Elders and any one of our names, and this session will show up.
Safe travels, everyone.
Tell your friends about it. Thanks a lot.
Which is why, when people are just downloading individual songs, it's